Welcome to the Does This Happen to You podcast, where we explore the funny side of truth is stranger than fiction stories. Our story this week is from Michelle Tuhou, who you'll find on medium.com. And here is our expensive opioid-fueled honeymoon. We had no flowers or lace on our wedding day, but we did have morphine for the groom. Some of you jetted off to Paris for your honeymoon, or can brag about the fine wine you served at your reception. But let me tell you about the decadent wedding and honeymoon my husband, Harry, and I had. Welcome to the U.S. Harry had just moved to the U.S. from the Netherlands on a fiancé visa, and I'd put together plans for a very simple ceremony. That's when a painful spot on his foot took a turn for the worse. He'd had a severe baseball injury as a young man that required much of his leg to be rebuilt. He didn't know it, but a surgical staple near his ankle was working its way loose. When it broke the skin, an infection attacked his bone. The infection looked horrible, and he was in terrible pain, but he would have no insurance coverage until he could get on my plan. Our ceremony was not scheduled for 3 more days. I didn't think he could wait that long. We had gone to urgent care the day before, but they said we needed to go straight to the emergency room. We couldn't swing the cost of that, as he had no insurance. So we went home. We weren't sure what to do. I went to work as usual the next morning, but was worried. I called my insurance company as soon as they opened and said something like, "Hey, just hypothetically, if I were to get married today, how long would it take for my spouse to be covered on my plan?" They said my insurance would start covering him immediately. "Thanks," I said. "I'm not calling for any particular reason." I didn't want to raise suspicions about pre-existing conditions. Then I called a judge I knew and asked him to meet me at my house. We weren't dressed up. Harry was close to losing consciousness from the pain and was lying on the sofa, his infected foot elevated. The judge arrived in his gardening clothes. I perched on the side of the sofa next to Harry, and we quickly said our vows. My 2 teenagers served as our only witnesses. And then we went straight to the emergency room. We hadn't planned to have a honeymoon at all. Money was tight, and he would not be allowed to get a job until his work permit came through. But we ended up having a very expensive honeymoon after all. A week in Paris would probably have cost less than our trip to the hospital. But in Paris, he wouldn't have had shots of morphine. Those ended up being a pretty darn good idea. If you're getting married, maybe check with your wedding planner. Harry is a man who typically balks at taking an aspirin, but it took 2 shots of morphine to address his pain. I hadn't really planned on opioids being a part of our honeymoon. Champagne, maybe, but morphine was the right choice for us, even though the doctor didn't offer me any. It was all about him. Usually, weddings and honeymoons are all about the bride. Well, that's what they claim, but I kind of felt ignored during our honeymoon. Harry was definitely the star that day. He ended up on IV antibiotics for weeks. Bone infections are nothing you want to screw around with, and we were told they can go dormant without being completely eliminated. We have to remain vigilant for life, always alert to signs of a flare-up. He could not walk for the first few weeks of our marriage, and I had to learn to clean and dress his wound and push medications through his PICC line. That was super romantic. I had just vowed to stand by him in sickness and in health, but I hadn't anticipated getting to the sickness part so soon. It's fortunate that we'd already obtained our marriage license and rings before his infection became so severe. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. From his point of view, It must have been a bit scary to deal with a move to another country, a new marriage, and a dangerous bone infection all at once. But because he's Dutch and stubborn, he started going on bike rides even before he could walk again in order to help his leg get better. We went through with the simple ceremony on June 15th, the day we thought was going to be our wedding day, but we always celebrate it on June 12th. It's been a great 18 years. Sometimes when I drive by the hospital, I think to myself, now that was a good honeymoon. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Kepler, and I hope you enjoyed listening to these stories as much as I enjoyed narrating them. I'd love for more people to hear these wonderful stories, so please share and tell your friends.